In this video, we're going to learn how to square polynomials. So as we begin thinking about squaring polynomials, let's take a moment and think about what the definition of squared actually means. And if we think about the definition of squared means something times itself. So if we take the definition of squared and we apply it to this expression that we see on the screen, what this squared is really saying is that when we take 2b plus 4 quantity squared, we're really saying take 2b plus 4 and multiply it times itself. So what we want to do every time we see the squared is take a moment and write out what this actually means. This actually means 2b plus 4 times 2b plus 4. And once we see this, we know that we can apply the rules of multiplication of polynomials to this particular problem. So now we're going to take 2b plus 4 times 2b plus 4. And here we're going to use that big distribution strategy that we talked about previously. So we're going to take each term in the first parenthesis, and we're going to multiply it by each term in the second. So we're going to take 2b, and we're going to multiply it by each term in the second set of parentheses, which is 2b plus 4. And then we're going to take this positive 4, and we're going to multiply it by everything in the second set of parentheses, which is 2b plus 4. And now we're going to actually apply these distributions. So take each term in the first parenthesis and multiply it by each term in the second. So 2b times 2b becomes 2 times 2 is 4, b times b is b squared, plus 2 times 4 is 8, and that has a b on it, plus 4 times 2 is 8, and there's a b there as well, and then 4 times 4 is 16. So now that we've distributed, we can work on combining our like terms. I notice here that 4b squared is the largest degree term, and it doesn't have any like variables that it can be combined with. The next thing I look at are the b's, and I notice I have 8b plus 8b for a total of 16b. And then from here, I notice I have just a constant, so we have plus 16. So you'll notice this works very much like multiplication. Once we write it out as the definition of what squared actually means, something times itself, we just apply the rules of multiplication. So let's try one more example together. Notice here that we have a trinomial being squared, and we first notice that since it's a squared problem, we should write it out as what squared really means. So this really means we're taking 5w squared plus 10w plus 8, and we are multiplying it by itself of 5w squared plus 10w plus 8. And then from here we notice that this is a multiplication problem, so we can apply the rules of big distribution. So we're going to take each term in the first parenthesis and multiply it by the terms in the second. So I'm going to start by writing 5w squared from the first parenthesis times this entire second parenthesis. So we have 5w squared plus 10w plus 8. And then I'm going to take 10w and I'm going to multiply it by everything in this second set of parentheses. So we have 5w squared plus 10w plus 8. Then I'm going to take 8 times everything in this second set of parentheses, so plus 8 times 5w squared plus 10w plus 8. So now that I've written my big distribution down, I'm actually going to perform the distribution. So I'm going to start with this first set of parentheses. 5 times 5 is 25. W squared times w squared is w to the fourth. Then I have 5 times 10, which is 50, and w squared times w to the first is w to the third. Then I have 5 times 8, which is 40, and then add on the w squared. So then from here I move on to the next set. So I have 10w times 5w squared. 10 times 5 gives me 50. W to the first times w squared gives me w cubed. 10 times 10 gives me 100. W to the first times w to the first is w squared. Then I have 10 times 8, which is 80, and then tack on the w. And then finally I have 8 times 5, which is 40, then I have w squared. 8 times 10, which is 80, and the w. Then 8 times 8, which is 64. So now that I've performed all of the distributions, I'm going to look at combining as many like terms together as I can. So I start off with w to the fourth, and I notice that that is the only w to the fourth. So I have 25w to the fourth. I then have multiple w cubes for a total of 100 w cubes. I then have multiple w squareds. 40 plus 100 is 140, plus 40 more is 180 w squareds. Then I have some just w's. 80 plus 80 gives me 160 w. And then last but not least is just my constant of 64.